now anyway. And what I'll do is I'll just flick across to the main session slides. And I know the vast majority of people will either know me or of course you'll know Doug, and we will just introduce ourselves as well in just a second as well. So let me just flick across to the main session slides. So if you see me looking across, I've just got a second laptop which shows me your view rather than the view for, of course, that you're getting as well, if you know what I mean. So let's just welcome you then to this morning. Well, we're kind of just into this afternoon's session. And we're going to have a look at this afternoon, a little bit of a taster of coaching with purpose. And of course, my name's Sam Sloan. If you haven't met me before, I know there's a few very, very familiar faces on this particular call today. My name's Sam Sloan. I've got a financial services and a retail background, but I've also got a coaching background that actually went back far longer than I actually ever realised, to be honest, when I was either a manager, leader of people, large teams, ran up to 84, big teams, but also within the financial services sector as well. That's where I kind of really started to hone my skills. And I decided to write a program, and I really wanted it to link with something that was very powerful, and that's exactly what I did and what I have done with Doug as well. So that's just a little bit about my background, but I'll just flick the slide on and I'll allow Doug to also introduce himself as well.
Hello, I'm Doug Strycharczyk. I'm the CEO for AQR, and my background is I'm a practitioner. Most of my life I've been a consultant, probably much more of a mentor than a coach. But in the course of my travels, I came across some very clever academics who were doing some wonderful things around mindsets, mental toughness, leadership that nobody in the practitioner world knew about. And so in the last, I don't know, for 10, 15 years, my role has been to flip between the worlds of the practitioner and the world of the academic and bring the ideas from academia into the practitioner world, because there are some fantastic tools and ideas and concepts out there that we don't use often enough. So that's me, and we'll tell you a little bit more about one of the concepts in a moment.
Yeah, fantastic, Doug. And this concept is certainly, the more I learn about it, the more it fascinates me. So yeah, really looking forward to hearing a little bit more from Doug in just a few moments. Please feel free to get involved in this particular session today. Whether you're familiar with Zoom or not, I'll talk you through some of the tools that are available as well. Pop your cameras on if you so wish. Please unmute yourselves, get involved in the conversations, and please ask questions as well as we kind of go through. You can either pop those into chat or we can kind of save them to the end as well when we'll do a Q&A. So we've also not only just got the cameras, etc., and the mics, there's also little emoticon tools that you can use. And if you open up your participants toolbar, so if you kind of wiggle your mouse, if you haven't already, run along the bottom, you have participants and you have the chat panels as well. Once you've opened up those, if you double click on the slide, it actually throws them across to the right hand side, if of course you want to do that. And there's things like ticks, crosses, etc. that you can use as well. But there's also the chat box. Please feel free to pop anything into the chat box and we'll pick up the questions. We have the lovely Sonia as well from AQR, who is also on the call this afternoon. And of course, any of the questions that we maybe not even get around to answering in this particular session, we most certainly will get round to coming back to you, but we will try and answer as many questions as we possibly can. So mental toughness then. And completely fascinating subject, and like I've just mentioned just a few moments ago, do you know, the more I learn about it, the more it actually fascinates me. But what I want to know is, what do you actually currently know about this particular concept? If you've heard of it before, you can give me a green tick, or you can pop something into chat. Let me know a little bit about what it is that you know about this fascinating concept of mental toughness. So you can give me a green tick if you've heard of it, or of course a red cross, and you can use those in that participants panel, or of course you can open up your chat box and you can pop into chat as well. Let's get you using Zoom. So Adrian's there saying, I'm accredited by AQR and I've used it with a client. Fantastic. Yeah, you can of course do the licensed user training as well for the mental toughness concept of the 4 C's, etc. So there's a few of you, Vicky saying yes. We've got Graham, of course, Johanna saying yes, Christy saying yes, and of course Peter as well. And Juliet's added, doing the user training at the moment. Brilliant, Juliet. It's fantastic. It really is. And the more you kind of see different concepts as well around and about within maybe your working life or even sometimes your personal life, it just seems to link with everything. It's fantastic. And Sonia's there saying, lucky enough to work for AQI. You most definitely are. And me and Sonia have been working very, very closely together with this particular program as well. So thank you very much, Sonia. Vicky's added there, a friend is accredited and recommend I take a look. Absolutely, Vicky. And thank you for joining today. So that's really interesting. Okay, so that, like I've said, that concept, I just kind of wanted to sort of get a bit of a feel of the room and sort of see where we were in relation to that. Now, if we kind of really want to set it down and give a quote, if you like, around exactly what it is, it's a personality trait which determines in some part how individuals perform when exposed to stresses, pressure and challenge, irrespective of the prevailing situation. Now, goodness me, what has been going on in the world just recently could potentially have put us maybe under more stress than maybe some of us have ever actually been under. And what a great opportunity that we have to look at this concept even further today, but not only around what's going on at the moment, but like we've said about the coaching concepts and how is it that we can actually use it in that particular realm. So I've got a poll for you, first of all, before I kind of hand over to Doug. What is most important for you? So I'm just going to bring in this poll. I'm going to launch that poll. You should see that pop up in the middle of your screen. Is performance most important to you? Whether it's your own performance, your team's performance at work, whatever that looks like for you. Is it agility? Maybe in those behaviors on how agile you are. Also your own well-being, and I think even more important and very pertinent at the moment as well. Or aspirations. Are you incredibly aspirational? Is that most important to you? I can see quite a few people are answering that poll there. Very interesting. I know you can't quite see the results yet. You will be able to in just a moment when I share them with you. I'll just give you a few more seconds. Okay, if you have selected an answer, just press submit for me at the bottom of that box. Just going to give you a little countdown, sort of 3, 2, 1. Fantastic. And I'll just end that poll. So let's just share those results with you and let's kind of see what actually the most important element of that for you was. Performance, yeah, that's incredibly important, whether for ourselves on how we ourselves perform, or of course, maybe if we have a team, or maybe we even within an organization or a department. That agility as well, and Doug's going to talk through this in just a moment. The agility of not only our own behaviors, but also maybe even influencing others. Now that well-being, that doesn't surprise me, actually, that well-being is at the top of the shop here. And as a coach, just how important that could really be back in the workplace when we get our people back to work, etc., and ensuring that their well-being is paramount. And of course, that aspiration as well, that could also be something that's incredibly important as well for each individual. So I'm just going to stop sharing those results. So that poll should now have disappeared. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to hand over to Doug, who's going to actually talk through some of those elements and how it actually links in with mental toughness and the 4 C's. So I'll hand over to you, Doug.
Thank you. And very, very briefly, we put up a little definition there of mental toughness, but probably the simplest way of describing mental toughness is it's describing our mental responses. That's what's happening in our heads when events occur. And it's important to the one thing that we know is that it's incredibly well supported by research. There are over 100 academic papers. I spoke about my connections with academia. We work predominantly with 4 key researchers, but through them with hundreds of researchers around the world. And there is an awful lot of evidence to support this. And there are 4 themes that come through consistently in the research. And one of them is there's a correlation, strong correlation between mental toughness and performance. In fact, we know that of all the factors that impact on performance, mental toughness, the mental toughness of an individual explains 25% of the variation in performance. Now that's massive, because there are probably 20 factors that have some sort of impact on your performance. Things like ability, interests, even the kind of support you get. But for one factor to be so significant is quite remarkable. And it highlights the importance of the mental toughness concept. The next, we're going to move on to the next slide. We talk about agility, and agility is about our ability to respond positively when something happens. And for a lot of us, it also means being curious enough to go and explore opportunity and not be frightened by that prospect. And again, the research shows that there's a correlation between being mentally tough and being agile, being positive about opportunity. And generally, probably the best way to describe it is the mentally tough tend to be more focused on the solution than the problem. They see the problem as a way of identifying some great solutions. Now, the third area, which is stress or well-being, there is a massive amount of research now, and it ranges all the way from things like a relationship between suicidality and mental toughness. In other words, the more mentally sensitive you are, the more prone you are to suicidality. But the University of Basel has carried out a massive amount of research, and they've published a lot of papers which show that the mentally tough and the mentally sensitive being the opposite end of mental toughness, are equally likely to get anxious and depressed, but the mentally tough can deal with it more effectively. And so they do not show the symptoms of anxiety and depression. And then there's one really interesting study which shows that there's a correlation between mental toughness and sleep. And that's the mentally tough will sleep better than do the mentally sensitive. Now, the last factor is, or the last outcome is aspirations. So this is very much about, again, seeing opportunity, about grasping opportunity, and about being aspirational and ambitious. Again, there's a relationship with mental toughness. Now, the question you were asked was really a trick question, because when you look at these four outcomes, they're really the same outcome. You can't separate performance from well-being. I mean, you can't achieve performance if you don't have good well-being, and performance actually contributed to your well-being. So all of these four factors are just four facets of the same thing. But of course, each of us will enter this discussion from our particular perspective. Next slide, Sam. So, why is mental toughness so important, and why is it so relevant to coaching? Well, one of the things that I guess, in all my time in people development and organizational development, we've been looking at behaviors, and organizations develop competency frameworks, and we tend to focus an awful lot on behavior. And there's nothing wrong with that. When we look at behavior, what we're looking at is how people act when things happen. And that's useful to know. It's especially useful to know in areas like recruitment, because you would like to understand something about the behavior of the people you're bringing on board. But actually, behavior is quite a visible thing. We can assess behavior if we get to know somebody reasonably over a period of time. What we find difficult to assess, and is fundamentally more important, is why do people behave the way they do? Because if we want to develop behaviors or change behaviors, we've got to get to that underlying notion. And that's where mental toughness makes a big contribution, because mental toughness is looking at how you think when events occur. And if we're concerned about behavior and we can understand how people are responding mentally to events, then we're beginning to get a big part of the answer. This is why we talk about in big part, it's not the whole of the answer, but it's a substantial part of the answer when we want to look at why do people behave the way they do. And if we can understand why, we can then focus our attention on that. Now, when you look at what coaching is about, coaching is essentially about, I think we'll have a quote at the end of this webinar, it's about helping people to work out a solution for themselves, but that requires self-awareness. So here we have a framework which helps us to, helps us to understand better what's going on in the mind of the person opposite, but it's also a framework and a means of helping somebody to understand themselves. If you can be self-aware, then you can achieve anything. Now, I mentioned earlier that there were people who were mentally tough and mentally sensitive. That notion of self-awareness is actually critical, because what we know is that you can be mentally tough and have all the advantages of being mentally tough and yet fail, simply because you're not self-aware. You don't understand yourself well enough to optimize yourself. But it's also true of the other end of the scale, because there are people who are mentally sensitive and at first sight might think, well, they have some disadvantages, and they can have disadvantages. But if they're self-aware and understand where those disadvantages lie and put in place strategies to deal with it, they can be as effective as anybody else. So this notion of self-awareness is central to our application of the mental toughness concept.
Yeah, most definitely. We're going to move into the 4 C's now, Doug. So thank you very much for that just for a second. But I'm going to introduce another poll for you, because I want to know what the 4 C's are. And let's just see who knows. So you've got 3 options to choose from. Control, commitment, courage and competence. You've got conscientious, competitive, challenge and confidence, or you've got control, commitment, challenge and confidence. Which one do you reckon is the correct 4 C's, which Dougie's going to talk through in just a moment? I can see quite a few of you have already answered. So select whichever radio button. It doesn't matter if you don't know, and that's the whole idea of this. Fantastic. I'll just give you a few more seconds and I'll end that poll. Just select your answer, press submit. I'll count you down. 3, 2, 1. Fantastic. I'll end that poll and I will share those results with you. Okay. Vast majority of you were absolutely bang on. But just a couple of you, I would have expected, if this is a brand new concept to you, were just a little bit off. But you know, at courage and competence, I can probably see where you were going with that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'll just stop sharing those results with you. And Doug, I'm obviously going to hand back over to you. That was our poll. I obviously didn't want to put that slide on. It would have told you the answer.
Right. No, that's a relief to me, because one of the problems, we now work in 80 countries around the world, and this is easily the leading version of mental toughness globally. We know that 80% of all research, for instance, is carried out using this concept. But we do have people who try to clone, and in Singapore, there's somebody trying to promote the 5 C's model. In Poland, there's been somebody trying to promote the 7 C's model. It's called the jingle jangle fallacy. By associating yourself with a really solid concept, you can often get people paying attention to it. But the 4 C's are control, commitment, challenge, and confidence. Just going back a little bit, this is not a new concept by any means. For those of you who are interested in history, the first person to mention this concept, although he used a slightly different piece of language, was Plato. And if you're familiar with Plato and his 4 virtues, he speaks about fortitude. And fortitude is another good word which can perhaps replace mental toughness. And if you look at what he's called fortitude and how he describes it, we know that it means exactly the same concept as we have now. So for 2,500 years, we've known it's important. The 4 C's are control, commitment, challenge, and confidence. That's the result of about 8 years of solid research from Professor Peter Clough, but it's also based on a lot of pre-existing solid research. So the idea of control is not new. A very clever man called Kasarek understood that the more that we feel in control of our lives and our work, the less stressed we become. Commitment is not new. It reappears in lots of different forms. People talk about conscientiousness, and in America, there's a bit of a fad talking about grit at the moment. That's commitment. So these are not new ideas. What we've been able to do here is bring together all of these ideas and understand how they fit together, and in a very special way. So we're going to go and look at some of these in a little bit more detail at the moment. The first one is control. That's really describing the extent to which I believe I control enough of my life to be able to achieve what I need to achieve. And what Professor Clough found was that it had two elements. One was life control, and that's where the sense of self-worth sits. So it's a kind of self-belief in yourself. You know, I can do it. And I suppose it relates to what Henry Ford meant when he spoke about, if you think you can, you can. If you think you can't, you're probably right. So very often the thing that helps us to achieve something is simply our mental response. So this is describing one aspect of it. The second one is emotional control. And that's really assessing to what extent mentally can we manage our emotions, or do we allow our emotions to manage us? So that's control in a nutshell. The next one's commitment. And commitment is, we often talk about it, it's about the extent to which I'll make a promise and keep a promise. So that naturally breaks into two things. One is goal orientation, and that's about when I'm asked to do something or when I want to do something, I naturally set goals for myself. And that's to do with visualization. So if I want to do something, can I imagine what success will look like? And can I even imagine what the feeling will be like? Because that's an important part of some people's motivation. But of course, we also know that some people will promise you the earth and they'll talk about the goals they're going to achieve and then do nothing. And so achievement orientation is really about, will I do whatever it takes? It's about being prepared to make the effort. And again, that's driven from your mental approach. Sometimes people just can't be bothered to make the effort, but some people get excited about the prospect of doing a great job. The third area is challenge. And this is where we begin to bring in some new ideas. So you're going to be very familiar with those two ideas. But what we've understood and what's beginning to be understood is that those two elements I've just described, control and commitment, are really how we would describe resilience. And resilience is a passive concept. It's about how do I respond when something goes wrong? Can I pick myself up and dust myself off and carry on going? But what the researchers have found, and we found in practice, is that some people possess something a little bit extra. When things go wrong, or they're faced with difficulty, or they're faced with a big challenge, they actually look forward to it because they believe that they can see the opportunity in it. So it's like explaining, why would anybody in their right mind go and climb Everest when such a high proportion of people don't make it? And for some people, it's that opportunity. I can do it. I can have a go. I want to experience what it feels like to get there. I know I'm going to have to take a risk. So one element is risk orientation. And that can be, I am really interested in exposing myself to new experiences, to opportunities. I can see opportunity. But sometimes what we find is that people will try something, it doesn't work, and the reaction then might not be optimal. Some people will try something, it doesn't work, and they'll say, oh, that doesn't work, I'm never doing that again. Others will say, that doesn't work, that was uncomfortable, but just a minute, I think I've learned something from that. I know it was a failure, but actually I've learned something very important. I now know how to do it better, I'm going to give it another go. And so this is where learning orientation comes in. And for me, this is the heart of the mental toughness concept. This is where reflection sits. Some of us are very good at reflecting and learning from what's going on around us. Others seem to turn a blind eye to things, and we don't learn from anything that happens to us. So that's a challenge element. And then the last component is confidence. And this is the bit that Peter Clough brought into the equation, and it became the glue that held everything else together. And this is about self-belief, because what he began to understand is when you looked at people with abilities, not everybody used those abilities. So the question was why? And he found some people didn't believe they had their own abilities. They could be the most able person on the planet, but they still doubted themselves. They still thought other people knew more. And so if that was the case, they didn't use those abilities. And then very, very sadly, you can get people with tiny amounts of ability who think they've got a lot. And it's pretty clear, you can see what the downside of that is. And as we explored this further, we found that there was another component to confidence that was important, and that was interpersonal confidence. Because you could have confidence in your abilities, but if you won't express that and won't share that with others and won't engage with others, nobody will know about it. So interpersonal confidence is about influencing other people as much as they influence you. So it's about having the mindset to do that. It's also about the mindset to be comfortable about asking questions, even the most stupid questions. It doesn't matter. People who have got a high degree of interpersonal confidence want to know an answer. They're not bothered about how people look at them. They're comfortable in their own skin. And so those are the 4 C's and the 8 factors. Those 8 factors are very, very important because they are independent. If you think about those 8 factors that I've described, they're the 8 different aspects of the way somebody responds mentally when something happens. And it can explain why I wanted to do something and I don't know why, but I can't do it. The person next to me seems to be able to do it easily. So what is it about what's sitting in here that's preventing me from achieving, or what is it that is making me wary about doing something I need to do in the future? The key to understanding that lies in those 8 factors, and that pattern will be unique for each and every one of us. Here is an example, and this is a real live example. It came in about 6 or 7 weeks ago. This is a senior leader in a very big international organization who has been extremely successful all the time up until COVID-19 came along. And he had built a fantastic team. The team was also very successful. And not unnaturally, what happened was the organization said, oh, we've got some pretty tough projects. We're going to have a pretty torrid time. We'll give the toughest projects to this group. And you can see that the overall mental toughness score for this individual is 7. That is above average. Yeah, the average is 5.5. It's significantly above average. So you'd expect this person to be more successful, perform better, probably enjoy better well-being. And in fact, what happened is very, very quickly, I mean, literally within a matter of weeks, this person began to spiral out of control. They began to experience mental health problems that they hadn't experienced ever in their recent memory. So they completed the mental toughness questionnaire. They were working with one of the coaches that work with us, and this was the pattern of scores. And you can see very high scores on life control, high scores on goal orientation and achievement orientation, extremely high scores on risk orientation, high scores on confidence and abilities. This is a person who's got all the hallmarks of being successful and being able to more or less glide through life. But hang on a minute, this person has a couple of areas of sensitivity. They've got comparatively low emotional control. So that means when things go wrong, they can throw the rattle out of the pram. They can sulk. They can respond badly. They'll allow their emotions to overrule perhaps more rational behavior. And interesting, the learning orientation, this person's learning orientation was actually also very low. And so when he was first presented with this, the individual denied that this was the case. But after some exploration, began to realize that, yes, their emotional control wasn't great. And that in fact, what had happened was that the team had learned how to deal with his outbursts and his sulks and everything. And they were pretty good at bringing him down to earth. So he wasn't really aware of any negative consequences until recently of his low level of emotional control. And similarly, his learning orientation. What emerged was that when things went wrong, when a problem arose, it was the team that sorted it out, worked out a solution, and would bring the solution to him. Well, that's a great example of delegation. But it also meant that he wasn't the person who was initiating it or leading that particular kind of activity. So why had he spiraled out of control? Well, like everybody else, his team was dispersed and everybody had to work from home. He had to work from home. Until January, he and the team basically worked in the same office or same building. They could talk to each other. If something went wrong and he had this outburst, they would make a joke out of it. They'll bring him down to earth. Now, when something went wrong, he's on his own. Nobody can see him and he can't see them. And so basically, as he sat in isolation, he found that his emotional control began to be a significant factor, as was his learning orientation. So as things went wrong, he found he didn't have that kind of ability to work out what was going on and resolve a problem. His team had been able to do that, but he now wasn't able to engage with his team. So as things began to go wrong, and they didn't have to be big things that went wrong, he found he was getting frustrated because he was repeating his mistakes and it was impacting on his emotional control. So suddenly, two factors that hadn't ever been a problem for this person became significant issues because the circumstances in the environment had changed. His mental toughness hadn't changed. It was just he was now in a different situation, and the consequences of being in that situation were creating problems for him. And that's the power of understanding mental toughness down to that granular level. Because it's very easy to take an overview of this individual and say, well, it's okay, it's fine, he can deal with most things. But it's the interplay between the factors that is important to understand. And in fact, in this scenario, his high levels of mental toughness contribute to the problem, because when he's got a high level of life control, he thinks he can do everything. He has a go at everything. It doesn't all work. When it doesn't work, his low level of emotional control becomes a bigger and bigger issue. So that's a very quick illustration. It probably wasn't that quick, Sam, of what mental toughness is and the kind of outputs that you can get from the mental toughness concept and the measure.
Absolutely. And I think when you kind of see it like that, and when you have that explanation with a real example here, to me, it just really demonstrates just how powerful a tool this actually is. You know, you imagine that scenario within your team, and how that team has kind of evolved around that behavior, etc. Perfect opportunity here as a coach to kind of unpick some of what's going on for this particular individual here. And of course, you could even do the whole thing with the whole team as well. Like I said, it just, what a fantastic tool to accompany you as a coach. It's incredibly powerful. So thank you for that, Doug. Brilliant. We're going to kind of have a look at how this all links to you now, how this links into your interventions, etc. So I'm going to do a final poll, like polls, can you tell? We're going to do a final poll that I'm going to share with you now. After Doug explaining, of course, all of those 4 C's, etc., and giving you that perfect example, what if you kind of had to choose one, or maybe even all 4 of them? Which one of the 4 C's would you say is most important for you? What's that maybe resonated with you? How's that kind of got you thinking about how it links to maybe some of your coaching interventions or maybe some of your teams? Okay, so again, select your answer. I know you can't see the answers. Quite a few of you are busy beavering away there. Select your answer and then press submit at that bottom of that polling panel. And then please feel free, once you've selected in just a few moments and when I share these results, I'll be just really sort of interested if anybody wishes to share why you felt that one was the most pertinent for you. Open up your mics and sort of tell me in just a moment when I share. So I'm just going to give you a few more seconds just to finish answering that. I think we've pretty much got everybody there. So 3, 2, 1. I will now end that poll and I'll share those results with you. So interestingly, we've got a couple of people saying Control for you, that would be the most important. Nobody, interestingly, has selected commitment. We have one person who's selected challenge. We have a couple of people selected confidence. But actually, the overwhelming here, very interestingly, is that actually 9 people have gone for all 4. So would a couple of people, please, if you wish to do this, explain maybe why you have chosen, just raise your hand and I'll open up your mic, and why you have chosen that particular one that really resonated with you, or of course all 4, if of course you wish to do that. Go for it, Graham. You should be able to unmute yourself.
So yeah, I think for me, I've chosen the challenge piece because as part of sort of mental resilience for me and mental toughness for me, it always feels that we're going to make mistakes in whatever we do. We can't be perfect. So it's how we learn to basically manage the levels of risk and reward in the decisions we make, but also then how we turn that experience into a positive and learn for next time. So that's why I place challenge as sort of the most important for me.
Absolutely, very interesting. And again, you know, you think again about those coaching interventions, etc., and just how you could help develop that individual, maybe as a coach or maybe even as a coachee. So yeah, that's a really great one. Thank you for sharing there, Graham. Anybody else wish to share?
That's a very interesting result here. When we sometimes ask the question in a slightly different way, we sometimes ask the question, which of the 4 C's do you think is most important for other people? What happens is most people score with a confidence scale. And it illustrates something. People tend to be more familiar with the idea of confidence than they are of challenge, commitment, and control. And often that introduces a bias into their work because they're diagnosing people as having high and low confidence. And curiously, I don't know if any of you work with young people, but if you're looking at adolescents, the construct, the C that is the most developed in young people is confidence. And yet I guarantee that if you look at school reports, they constantly talk about the confidence levels of adolescents. The issues are much more about commitment, sticking at things, and much more about challenge for young people. It isn't confidence. They tend to be, in general, cocky beyond their years and their experiences.
Yes, I remember it well when my kids were young, but it's interesting when you do look at a school report, just how it correlates as well. So again, thank you for that. I'll just stop sharing that particular poll because I just want to break you out now into a couple of separate breakout rooms. But before I kind of do that, there's quite an interesting quote here that actually a colleague of mine shared with me a few years ago, and I just kind of felt it really sort of resonated. A coach is someone who tells you what you don't want to hear, who has you see what you don't want to see, and so you can be who you've always known you could be. Interesting. Sometimes people don't know, and I think that is also the beauty of this. Sometimes this can highlight, just like on that STEM report earlier, maybe some things that maybe people aren't aware of as well. But what I am interested in now is just popping you into a couple of breakout rooms, because I want to know from your perspectives now, what's this kind of generated in your mind? How could these concepts actually help and support maybe some of your coaching interventions? How do you think you could actually use them? What difference do you think it's going to make for you? So what I'm going to do, I'm actually just going to make Sonia and Doug a co-host, just so it doesn't actually pop those 2 guys into a breakout room. There we go. And I will set up 3 separate breakout rooms. And please get in there. You've got a small team. You'll probably have around about 5 people in that room with you. Select maybe somebody that is a bit of a spokesperson, which kind of just gives a little bit of an essence around what it is that you have discussed in this breakout room. But I'm just really interested just to sort of see how you feel, how this is actually going to knock into your own coaching interventions. I'll just pop you in there literally just for about 5 minutes, just to have a little bit of a chat with those individuals in there. I'll send a brief message just to sort of say when you've got a couple of minutes remaining, and then I'll send you a message when I was just about to close them down. Is that okay with everybody? I'm not sure if everybody's been in a breakout room before. They're pretty simple. You shouldn't get a prompt to send you in. You should go in automatically. But yeah, just have a chat with your peers in this particular breakout room, and I'll bring you back in around about 5 minutes. Okay, guys, I will send you in, and I'll speak to you in a few moments.
Hello, Leslie, again. Are you there, Peter, or is this just a fabulous view of your office? I'll just get that.
Spoke about, and Doug, come in if I do you a disservice around, you know, his aim is always to boost resilience and resourcefulness with his clients, and he finds the tool useful in particular around challenge. So the coachees are self-sufficient by the time he leaves, so they can challenge themselves, and also around the learning and orientation. So post him leaving and the coaching relationship stopping, they can learn to look back to go forward.
Yeah. I think sometimes that can be a massive challenge for some leaders, isn't it? It's that dependency. And I think if you can develop that, yeah, then fantastic. That sounds like a really productive conversation. Or lack of dependency. You know what I mean? Absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing, Johanna. Anybody else wish to share? Adrian? I think you just raised your hand there on camera.
I did. It was a deliberate one as opposed to an involuntary one. I was with Peter, Leslie and Wendy, and I'm embarrassed to say it was more of a monologue than a discussion, because the other three were very new to it, and I've been using it for a couple of years with a client now. And the things that I think I felt were of use to me was, firstly, it's in an easy to understand language, particularly if you're working with audiences for whom English is a second language, and compare that with, you know, some tests that talk about neuroticism and conscientiousness and agreeableness and things like that, which are difficult concepts for even English speakers to understand at times, never mind people working in a second language. I felt that the little exercise that Doug just did, which shows the first page and all the scores, is really useful in terms of showing, you know, the norm, shall we say, you know, which is 6 scores of 6, 7, and 8, but primarily the outliers and how they may interact. And if we go back to the slide you showed before, Sam, which is a coach about helping people see things they don't know, you know, blind spot under Johari's window.
Oh, yeah.
Those outliers are very easy to A, link together, and B, describe in circumstances. You can use the tool very much for saying, what happens if, can you give me an example of when?
Yeah.
And the third thing that I talked about and the others listened to, but Leslie and I did have a bit of a discussion about it, was it's linked to other concepts. So, for example, emotional control and interpersonal confidence, and it's linked to emotional intelligence. If people have come across things, I don't mean the audience today, but your clients, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a really productive conversation, especially for those in your breakout room that weren't necessarily familiar with this particular tool. Of course, they have.
I do apologise to Peter, Leslie, and Wendy for hogging it.
Not at all. I'm sure they've got some significant value out of that particular session there. But yeah, again, you're absolutely right. And as I was kind of just showing you this, even just this quote, to me, it does scream Johari window, because you've got that opportunity there to allow people to sort of self-reflect and recognise maybe things like you've just said that they just simply weren't aware of, and that emotional intelligence then starts to really come into play as well. So brilliant. Thank you for very, very much for sharing that as well, Adrian. Anybody else from breakout room number 3?
We were room number 3, Sam.
Oh, was you room number 3?
We were 3. Yeah.
I know we've spoken to 2 people, so the other
not
room...
only did I hog it, but I also went out of turn as well. So very notable.
That's quite all right, Adrian. The other breakout room then that we haven't heard from, would somebody like to share an essence of your conversation?
Hi Sam, Sonia here. Can you hear me?
I certainly can, Sonia.
Yeah, we covered actually. It's quite interesting how similar points that we covered. I know Juliet's raised her hand, so I'll let Juliet kind of summarise, but I just wanted to point out how interesting it was that every single room, including ours, spoke about the simplicity in the language and how kind of easy to understand and interpret. But a big focus in our room was how to use this as a framework to kind of guide everything else. But I did find it interesting that everybody picked up on that point. So yeah, but I will let Juliet finish off on that.
That's all right. Juliet, would you like to open up your mic?
Yeah, thank you. I think, again, not unlike Adrian, I did quite a lot of talking because I'm in that early stages of doing the training. So having got quite a lot of psychometric tools under my belt, it's always great to find one that you think really hits the mark. So I think for me, it was, as well as I think Sonia's saying, I know Christy, you talked about it just being easy to understand, easy to explain. You can share that STEN with a client, and they can start to see themselves before you really need. And then obviously, then hopefully that opens up the conversation. I haven't obviously used it just yet, but one of my clients who. It's interesting, we talked about people who have particularly high mental toughness and don't get that not everybody does, and are so they're not self-aware, so they just sort of don't really understand that it is the thing. So one of my clients particularly, who is really driving through, going through a huge reorganisation program, really focusing on getting through this in terms of making from a business perspective. And when you talk to him about understanding or helping everyone understand how they're dealing and what, with particularly around wellness, his quote to me was, "Is that a thing?" So I would so once I've finished my e-learning, I'm certainly going to be using one of my tests and working with him, because I think there's a chink there. I think he wants to know more, but for him, seeing it in black and white in a framework rather than me just talking about it, I think will be a huge pivot for him to really start to understand a bit more.
Yeah. What did you say to him when he said that? Is that a thing?
I said, yes, it is.
I was just interested to see what you said.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely is. Brilliant. Thank you very much for sharing there, Juliet, that essence of your conversation as well. And of course, Sonia as well. Brilliant stuff. Okay, so I've got a couple more questions for you as well yet before I kind of open it up to the floor. open up your mics if you like, or pop this into chat, whichever it is that you kind of wish to do. I'm just interested now, if we take any of the 4 C's that, of course, Doug just spoke through just a few moments ago, what approach would be useful to develop mental toughness or encourage those coping strategies? Because, you know, Juliet's just mentioned there about well-being. I think it's one of the biggest elements when people start to return to work. It's not just necessarily about developing that mental toughness, but it's also sometimes just recognizing, actually, this coping strategy may actually be quite useful for me. And how is it, as a coach, can we actually help develop and encourage those types of things within our individuals, or even within ourselves? We can do a bit of self-coaching as well. So what's your thoughts? Please open up your mics, pop into chat, anything that's kind of running through your mind here. Go for it, Graham.
So I think it depends on a lot of what you're sort of coaching around, I think, but mental toughness is a tool that, as part of any toolkit that you work with an individual in coaching, I think if you can boost their mental toughness, or at least help them to understand where they sit on that process, and therefore where they're perhaps more at risk and what they can do to improve, then I think it's a really, really useful tool. As we were talking about in our little breakout group, the concept of resourcefulness and allowing people to be able to come out of the coaching process stronger and arguably less likely to need coaching again. Then I think whether that's on a mental toughness or a simple basic toolkit process, then I think that's really, really useful. So I think my approach would be very much to help them to understand what's worked in the past, boost that resourcefulness, and understand how they've reacted to situations in that way. And I do actually work a lot with individuals where mental health concerns are at play. So, you know, on that cutting edge really between kind of what is counselling and sort of executive coaching. So it's often about trying to work very much that piece in there, so that they can boost their own sort of toolkit and build their own toolkit for the future.
Absolutely. And you know, just as you were kind of chatting there, Graham, I think that could almost be lifting that barrier or that blocker for that particular individual. Was that the element that was actually stopping them maybe going on to do different things, or maybe to develop further? So I think that's a really nice kind of way of sort of explaining to me how to sort of move somebody on to allow them to be more resourceful and maybe self-recognize as well what's been going on for them. So I think that's a great point. Thank you, Graham. We've got Johanna there saying that learning orientation, what I have learned and developed over the last few weeks of COVID, I'll take forward with me. Do you know, again, I think that's another really, really good point. What's worked for us, what hasn't worked for us, what's worked for us. I've spoken to so many people about working from home, and sometimes they've never even actually attempted to do it. They felt that the office environment was for more for them. However, they've started to recognise that actually they can do things in maybe a slightly different way. And of course, that work-life balance, that starts to bump into all of those things that Doug was talking about earlier around maybe being more aspirational, doing something different. And again, you know, what is it that you're going to take forwards with this? And again, you can self-coach yourself as well. I think that's a really good point. Thank you, Johanna. And Peter's added, I think there's powerful aspects of 4C's framework. It gives us the language to be able to discuss these issues with clients. Of course it does. And I think it also gives us that framework there that, of course, if you complete certainly the MTQ Plus reports, you get 3 reports. And one of those reports is a coaching report. And that can really help support those pointed specific areas that you may want to coach around. That's actually going to make a difference quickly as well. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, of course, but of course you've got that report there to help and support that coaching intervention as well. And Johanna's also added there, it's the agility piece. Yeah, it is. And it's the agility not only for what and how you can coach that client or that individual, but of course I think it's the agility as a coach to really point to those specifics as well. So brilliant, you've got some great points up on there. Just another couple of points here as well, and this kind of bumps into very much what everybody's sort of saying, the individual's capacity to deal with pressure, situations, threats and opportunities. And sometimes as a coach, we enable people to see those opportunities that maybe we're getting maybe in the way, a little bit like what Graham was saying there about allowing that kind of blinker to come off, shall we say, or that sort of blindfold to come off, and really sort of open up those opportunities, or even their own eyes to the possibilities, shall we say. And I think that's a real privilege as a coach to be able to kind of do that. Also about making better decisions. That is going into this learning orientation, like we were just mentioning just a few moments ago. You know, what is it that we learn from the situations, and how, of course, we want to take the things that work for us forwards, not so much the things that don't work for us. And I think as a coach as well, one of the biggest things for me is about always being curious. And I think the more I learn about the concepts of the 4 C's and how it links beautifully with coaching, is how curious can we be? What is it that we notice? What is it that we've seen within each individual that actually really reflects within their behaviour, that you can see within not only ourselves, our own reports, but also within maybe the individuals that we're coaching as well. And I think the more curious that we are, the more that we learn. There's a quote by, it's the Dalai Lama, I can never say his name correctly, but he says, when we speak, we only repeat what we already know, but when we listen, we learn something new. And I think that really links into that curious piece as well. So when we're listening, it's not just about listening though with our ears, sometimes we listen with our eyes. And I think the reports can actually tell us an awful lot more than maybe sometimes people recognise within themselves. And this is that quote that Doug was mentioning earlier as well, about coaching is unlocking people's potential to maximise their own performance. And sometimes just unlocking that door can be incredibly empowering for individuals. Okay, we are coming up towards the close of the session, but I've still got a few tasks that I would like you to do. But of course, one of the things that when I wrote this programme, I wanted it to be a really powerful program that linked with something that was really specific and tangible, and that you could see the distance traveled for individuals. And we ran the pilot back in February, and we had 6 people go through that particular cohort. And we linked it to the EMCC, and I'm sure Doug, if you would like to sort of talk a little around about why we kind of chose the EMCC to sort of link it with this particular program. And of course, then that is an accredited program through that particular body. Doug, would you like to say something about the EMCC? You are muted. I haven't muted you. I think you just need to unmute yourself. I think it's when you came back out of the breakout room. There we go. Okay,
right. So we looked at a number of qualification awarding bodies, and of course, as you will all know, one of the big issues in coaching is there isn't a general standard for coaching, and there's lots of unaccredited coaches applying the trade. So that creates a bit of an issue. When we looked at the world of coaching, we tend to focus more on performance coaching rather than life coaching. We looked around and we saw people like the ICF, the Institute of Coaching, the Institute of Leadership and Management, and all those bodies. And we could see that there was quite a spread of qualifications. Some of them were very academic. So you could go off and do a master's in coaching. You can do the RLM programs, tend to be pretty academic. But what we wanted was something that was very practitioner orientated. And of course, the EMCC as a body is a body that is run by practitioners for practitioners. It's not a private organization. It's not a for-profit organization. It's predominantly about the coaching and mentoring profession. And we liked what they were talking about. And as we spread our wings globally, yes, there are a couple of organizations that are seen all over the world, but the one organization that is getting recognized as a high quality coaching and mentoring organization globally is the EMCC. So we entered into, AQR itself entered into discussions with the EMCC. We work moderately closely with the EMCC. We actually work with the other coaching awarding bodies, but we have to say the EMCC brings something to the world of coaching that the others don't quite bring. The others all can do a good job, but they all bring in something else that perhaps coaches don't need. this is all about coaching and mentoring. We also like the fact that it talks about mentoring as often as it talks about coaching. So those are the reasons why we looked at the MCC.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd like Doug's just been saying there, you know, it was really important to us that if we were going to take this out, that we wanted to have that global standard and that gold standard to be able to award individuals that came through this particular program. So not only do you get the psychometrics linked to this before the event actually even takes place, we get you to complete some reports, and then of course we get you to complete the reports after the event as well, because we're really interested to see that distance traveled. And of course then we've got that demonstratable shift, shall we say, for individuals as well, which again can be incredibly powerful. What I've just popped into chat though there, and I'll pop a couple of links into chat in the next few moments, is it from the EMCC perspective. The EQA is the program itself, which is a EQA accredited program. And if you attended this particular program, you then get an EIA award or foundation award in coaching. And again, like Doug's just mentioned there, it's the gold standard in coaching. It's very robust. It's incredibly robust, the standards. And funnily enough, I was on a event last week with 3 separate individuals, one from the EMCC, one from the ICF, and one from the IOC. And we were talking about just how standardized some of the coaching is, and of course non-accredited, whereas of course with the EMCC it's incredibly robust, and everything around this particular program is actually written around those particular principles and standards, not only from the EMCC coaching perspective for the best practice, but also through the MTQ plus report, and also the ILM 72, which of course is a separate report, which is for a leadership, which I hadn't actually even talked about in this particular session today. But all of the content is woven around both of those particular principles, and it just works, it dovetails off into each other beautifully. The way that I've actually written this is, initially it was of course a face-to-face event. However, with this global pandemic going on, we've kind of converted it into a VILT or a virtual learning platform now. I've got 10 years experience in the virtual field, so it's not something that's particularly new to me. So I've just converted this particular content anyway to make it, you get the same experience as you've kind of seen a little bit today. I've kept you busy a little bit today, but certainly this particular program keeps you incredibly busy. And as you can see there on the slide, it's actually 20 hours of learning within this particular workshop, and it's incredibly robust. And some of the feedback that we actually got from that cohort that came through back in February has been incredible, the shift. And some of these guys were incredibly experienced coaches, and the learning has been phenomenal to kind of watch them go through that journey. But also, this isn't just about experienced coaches, this is about people that are also new to coaching. And we also had a couple of people on the course that were brand new to coaching. And again, it just kind of works whichever level you are. And we also have a buddying system. So when people are going through the programs, somebody who maybe has a lot of experience, for instance, kind of buddies with maybe somebody that doesn't. So it's not only coaching, but it's also mentoring within the program. It just fits really, really nicely. What we can also do, of course, I'm going to pop those 2 email addresses into chat kind of before the end of the session. And of course what I'll also do is I'll pop a brochure into chat as well, that if there is further sort of information that you kind of want, then of course we can obviously get some further information off to you. What I'm just about to do there's a landing page on my particular website. I've also got the email addresses for AQR also, and I'll just pop those in, and I'll just pop that brochure in as well. You can just simply copy and paste them out of chat. It works exactly the same as like a Word document, for instance. I'm just kind of breaking those up for you as well. But what I will also do is I will just literally pop in. So if you open up your chat window, if you haven't already done that, I will. One of the things that you can't do is set up a couple of things in the background. So there we go. And that's one of the brochures that actually tells you a little bit more about the program as well. But please feel free if you have any questions. I will open it up for questions in just a moment as well. So please feel free to pop those out into chat and download that little brochure as well. So let's open it up to questions then. So we've got around about 15 minutes for questions. If anybody wishes to ask anything, of course, you've got me here specifically about the program. I wrote the program. Me and AQR have been working very, very closely together in this particular program as well, because we wanted to make sure that it really fit not only for the EMCC perspective, but of course from the 4Cs perspective. So what questions do you have? You've either got me or Doug or Sonia, of course, here that of course can answer any of your questions. You can just raise your hand, you can pop it into chat, whichever way it is that you would like to do it. Surely we must have some questions. Go for it, Adrian.
Doug, I've got a question for you. Are you aware of any research that correlates mental toughness? Oh, bear with me, somebody just rung the door and my dogs are going by me. Mental tough.
You want to know about mental toughness and dogs, right?
No. Any correlation between physical well-being and mental toughness? You know, I've been in situations where I've seen people who are tired for whatever reasons and have a very great difficulty in making even the simplest of decisions. And I wondered if you had any conversation, any correlation there.
Well, there are studies, and you've actually picked up two quite separate things. There is a great piece of research on fatigue that actually points to one of the benefits for mentally sensitive people rather than mentally tough people. Generally, if you are engaged in an activity that has got the potential to produce fatigue, make you tired, the mentally tough can deal with it better and they can keep going longer than the mentally sensitive. However, there's an interesting downside in that the mentally tough keep going longer because they don't recognize the warning signs. And so there's a downside there in that the first they know about fatigue is when they topple over. Mentally sensitive, and so that's a potential downside for being mentally tough. You know, it's you just keep going. The mentally sensitive tend to be better at spotting the warning signs of fatigue or work overload. But the difficulty with the mentally sensitive, especially in a team or a group setting, is sometimes we don't listen to them. You know? And so they're a valuable asset in a team or a group setting because they bring another perspective and another dimension to a team or a group, but they can be easily overlooked. So for fatigue, there is a fair amount of research, and it was all carried out by a very clever woman called Fiona Earle. And I'm pretty sure there's a note on it somewhere that we could get to. But
I'll connect with you on LinkedIn, and we can take this further if that's okay with you, Doug. That'd be great.
But more generally, if you're talking about being fit, well, yes, there is also evidence that the more mentally tough will stick to regimes more carefully. So, you know, whether it's a diet or, you know, eating more sensibly or in a more controlled way. I shouldn't label people's food as sensible or not sensible. Or it's, you know, doing fitness routines like going regularly for walks or running or doing whatever it is. The mentally tough tend to stick at that a little bit better. And of course, that's a reflection of something else that's important for coaching, in that if you introduce ideas and tools and techniques to individuals, what you'll find is that the mentally tough might not need it so much, tend to be better at sticking to them. The mentally sensitive tend to give up more easily, especially if they can't immediately or very quickly feel that it's making a difference. So what we see, for instance, is there's a great deal of stuff on the internet, and we've had a couple of people who are actually mental toughness enthusiasts put a couple of posts in that make me cringe a little bit, talking about how great it is to do power posing and stuff like that. Those techniques work, but they don't work for all people, and they don't tend to work very well for the mentally sensitive. The people who pick them up are already the mentally tough. And so
Thank you.
there's it's all kind of all related, but when you look at the common thread, it's still how we're responding mentally to what's going on.
Thank you.
Yeah, very interesting. Some of the can't think of the research, can't think of the word then. Some of the research that's been conducted that, you know, we kind of chat about various different sort of phone calls, etc. It's just fascinating how it all links and correlates. It really is. So thank you for sharing that, Doug. Okay, is there any other questions that you would like to point? Ask anything.
It's gone very quiet.
It has, hasn't it? Hi, Sammy.
Yes. I actually picked up from the previous webinar the Canadian important research, which conclude that half of the mental toughness is genetic. And immediately after the webinar, I picked up your book, trying to find out this important research, but I couldn't actually manage to find the exact reference for this research. Would it be possible, please, to email it or to me, or put it in the chat?
I will see. The challenge sometimes with some academic papers is you have to pay to get hold of the academic paper off a website. I'll check. A lot of academic papers we have copies of, and I'm happy to send you a copy, Sammy. I know which one you're talking about. It's the University of Western Ontario, who did a study on monozygotic and dizygotic twins. I can't remember, it was either 600 or 800 twins who were separated shortly after birth and brought up in different environments. And the researchers then found them, tested them, and of course, if they're brought up in different environments and had different mental toughness scores, then you would know that environment was a big factor. If they had very similar mental toughness scores on some factors, if not all factors, even though they were brought up differently, that would indicate a genetic effect. So Sam is right. So around half, on average, this isn't true for every single one of us, or on average, around half of the average person's mental toughness is derived genetically. About half of it, on average, is the consequence of our life's experience and what we learn from them. So things like what our parents have done with us, what our teachers have done with us, and our peers have been very significant. You know, for the first 20 years of our life, we learn often far more from our peers than we ever do from our parents and teachers. So these are the three big factors that will shape our mental toughness and our mental sensitivity. But of course, the good news about that is if you can learn to be mentally tough or mentally sensitive, at that point you can learn to be different at any point if it's important for you to do so. So yes, I'll try to find if it's open, Sammy. If not, we'll see if we can find an explanatory note.
Okay, thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you for asking that question, Sammy. Another great question. Okay, what I'd like to know then, now you can get all very technical now. You can use your annotation tools here if you so wish. If you go right up to the very top of your screen, you'll see it should say you are viewing Samantha Sloan's screen, and then it's got view options just at the side of it. There's a little drop down bar, and I think it is, I'm just going across to my second screen here. Third option down is annotate. And what that will do is it will open up a little toolbar for you. And if you click on the T, what it allows you to do is type on the screen. Because what I'm really interested in is what has this session highlighted for you today, certainly from a coach's perspective. And of course, just how powerful this can potentially be as a tool as well. So feel free to have a go at annotating. What has it highlighted for you? Now I can see who's typed. I can see Mac there has given us a nice line. Thanks for that. Oh, I didn't mean to move that on. Just 1 second, I'll move it back. That was me clicking the screen. If you double click the screen, it moves it on when you're in this mode as well. Yeah, you can type, select the little T. There is a drawing tool as well. It's a little bit more difficult to kind of freehand, shall we say. But what has it highlighted for you today? I'm just going to change my text color as well, because you can also do that. If I just change, there we go. You've got a little palette as well, and then of course you can see. Brilliant. So let's see what we have here. We have, don't worry if you type over each other, I can move you around. Graham's added better understanding of how the tools can be used in specific areas to generate candor in discussions with coaching clients. Definitely. That's a really great point. Thank you, Graham. I've got Sammy added, mental toughness is a major factor to explain variation in performance. It most certainly does. 25% in variation, like Doug spoke about right at the very beginning of today's session. We've got Johanna saying there, reminder of why I love the tool. It's a fantastic tool, it really is. And you know, it works with anything. I've not found anything that it doesn't work with yet. What else have we got? We've got Peter adding there, options for coaching, training and development, most definitely. And what else have we got? We've got Doug, found it useful to hear how important ease of language in a coach's work. We take it for granted, yeah. It is a very simple tool, even if you're not familiar with it. You can actually really relate to it straight away as well. So that's a really another lovely point. Thank you. If you have typed something and I haven't read it out, just click away somewhere else on the screen and it will appear as if by magic. Juliet's added, reinforce the value of the straightforward language of the tool. Again, very, very similar to what Doug has just added as well. We've got Mac adding Adrian's question about fatigue, and Doug's answer was a great reminder of perspective and things to consider when dealing with both mentally tough and mentally sensitive as well. Again, another lovely point. And last but not least, I think, let me just move Wendy over there. Wendy's added, it appears to be a flexible tool. Thanks for sharing, Adrian. Yeah, definitely. And I think we've got Sammy added as well. Risk orientation is positive, not always a negative. No, definitely. It's another great point to kind of coach around as well, that risk orientation. Fantastic. I think I've got everybody's there. I don't want to miss anybody. What I can also do is I can, I've just saved that particular screen there as well, and I can either pop that onto LinkedIn, or I can pop that onto an email and share that with you as well, just so it serves as a reminder. I do need to clear those down before I kind of move on. Otherwise, oh, Vicky's added there, like the 4 C's and how it would sit well with coaching for my own personal development. Yeah, definitely. Like I said before, you know, you can coach yourself as well. It's not just necessarily about coaching others as well. Okay, I know Sammy's just highlighted that book there, that Developing Mental Toughness, which of course was written with Peter and Doug as well. Of course, we've got Doug on the call today, but of course, so there's some other books there as well, which are actually plays a part within that particular workshop that we were just talking about just a few moments ago. So unless anybody has any other questions, I would like to thank you very, very much for today's session. If anybody wishes to any questions, please add us onto LinkedIn. You've got Doug, myself, Sam Sloan, and you've got, of course, Sonia Robinson as well. We're all here to answer your questions and to kind of provide support around this as well. So please, if anybody wants to point any questions, please feel free to do that. And of course, I popped those links into chat earlier. Other than that, guys, I will be here for the next couple of minutes. If anybody wishes to take anything offline, please feel free to do that. But other than that, thank you very much for joining, and we've finished bang on time. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thanks, Sam.
You're welcome. Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sammy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was a great session.
Thank you, Sammy.
Sam, where do we get the recording?
The recording, I will send you the recording if you add me onto LinkedIn.
I will do that now.
I will, it's Samantha Sloan, it's just a headshot, 123 People Development, and I will send you the recording and it'll be available to you as soon as it's downloaded after this particular session.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Mac. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sam. I'm going to look at your program, but I want to just finish my e-learning first.
Oh, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, because you know that will really help you with the program as well, because it weaved all of the way through the whole principles of the 4 C's.
Yes.
It works really well.
And how often are you running the program?
At the moment, we're just having a look to see when we can actually start to run the VILTs, but we're open to suggestions, because what we wanted to do, this is kind of the first stage of the marketing, and then what we're going to do is then start to get some programs in, but we're ready to rock and roll.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you for the session.
You're most welcome, Juliet.
All right, thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. If anybody that's still in the session wants to ask a question, please feel free to do so.